You can't sit here and lie about that. Those 5 words from Senator Michael Bennet just exposed the brutal reality of Trump's Treasury Secretary pick. What you're about to witness isn't just another Senate hearing. It's a mathematical demolition of Scott Bessent's entire economic plan. Bennet didn't just question the numbers, he systematically destroyed every defense Bessent tried to mount about deficit spending and tax cuts for the wealthy.
On our growing deficit. I mentioned to you then that domestic discretionary spending is only 15% of our budget. And I think if you were serious about deficit reduction, you might not push for tax cuts that almost certainly could not be offset by discretionary adjustments alone. And now, of course, we know you can't. Today, we actually have the details of your plan. Take health care from 10 million Americans, 126,000 Coloradans, cut nutrition assistance for millions of adults, sunset clean energy investments that are so critical to the American West, give over 40% of the tax benefits of this bill to the top 5%. And it's not even close to being paid for. Even my colleagues on the Republican side, who for years and years and years have claimed to be the fiscally responsible party, now are admitting that it's not paid for. This bill adds another $2.4 trillion to our national debt. It will push the deficit to GDP ratio up to 7%, which you said when you were here before was unsustainable, far from the 3% target that you described. If you look at your proposals taken together, there is no getting around the fact. There is no getting around the fact that the richest Americans receive an average tax cut of $300,000, which again, we're not paying for with the discretionary cuts that you advertise. So once again, we will have to borrow money in order to assist the people in this country who least need a tax cut at this moment, while the Americans who have been made miserable by the economy that they're in actually see income reduced because of cuts to Medicaid and cuts to SNAP. Meanwhile, and I think, Mr. Chairman, this is really important, meanwhile, interest rates are at 20-year highs. Moody's has slashed our credit rating because of the fiscal irresponsibility of this administration. The World Bank has cut our growth estimates in half, and the bond markets are screaming at us to stop. We now pay, and we are paying this year, more in interest than we are in the national defense. Secretary Bessent, how can you square your concern with fiscal health with deficit finance growth for families that need those tax cuts least?
Senator, I'll begin with that we did not get here. We inherited this fiscal situation that I believe.
Well, you inherited from Donald Trump, who was here. You did, Mr. Bessent.
No,
yes,
sir.
you did, Mr. Bessent. You inherited from Donald Trump. He's the first president to come back after a 4-year hiatus, after we know exactly what the last tax cuts did, which was blow a massive hole in our deficit and debt. You can't sit here and lie about that. It's true. The data, to coin a phrase, the data shows that that's the result. The math shows that that is the result. No one on this side of the aisle admits anymore that or claims anymore that they didn't blow a huge hole in the deficit. They did. And now you're here saying to the American people, let's double down on that. We're going to give tax cuts for the wealthy. We are going to give tax cuts again to the wealthiest people in America, and we are going to finance it on the backs of the sons and daughters of teachers and firefighters and police officers all over this country, because we can't pay for it. Because the Treasury Secretary discovered somehow that domestic discretionary spending is only 15% of the budget, and therefore you can't balance it there.
Well, sir, we had a referendum on November 5th.
You certainly
on your
did. I agree
economic
with
policies. Your side lost.
I agree with that.
And a higher decibel
And I'm
level.
a rare Democrat who doesn't blame Donald Trump for winning. I'm sad he won. I don't blame him for winning. But don't come here.
In your statements,
Go ahead,
they
Mr.
have
Secretary.
veracity.
Go ahead, Mr. Secretary. What?
Higher decibel level does not give your statements more veracity.
My statements are true, if that's the word, if that's what you mean by veracity. My statements are true. You blew a massive hole in the deficit when your predecessor was sitting here under Donald Trump. And so the question is, can't we think of something better to do with the money than this debt, than drive up interest rates by borrowing money from our kids so the richest people in America can get a tax cut when they don't need it? That is the reality of your plan.
Well, sir, actually the high interest rates were achieved during the Biden administration in October of 2023, and we have not touched those rates since then. So
the higher interest rates.
No, your statement's incorrect.
I'm out of time, and I appreciate the indulgence of the chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
What Senator Michael Bennet did in that hearing room wasn't just political theater. It was a forensic audit delivered in real time, exposing the mathematical impossibility of Trump's economic agenda, while Bessent sat there offering talking points instead of answers. Bennet opened with a devastating fact that cuts through all the rhetoric. Domestic discretionary spending is only 15% of the federal budget. This isn't opinion or partisan spin, it's arithmetic. When Bessent claims he can achieve fiscal responsibility by cutting domestic programs while simultaneously delivering massive tax cuts, he's asking Americans to believe that you can balance an equation by only adjusting the smallest variable. The numbers Bennet presented tell a story of fiscal recklessness disguised as responsibility. The proposed tax plan hands over 40% of its benefits to the top 5% of earners, giving the wealthiest Americans an average tax cut of $300. Meanwhile, 10 million Americans lose health care access, and millions more see cuts to nutrition assistance. This isn't tax reform, it's upward wealth redistribution financed by the middle class. When Bessent tried to deflect by claiming they inherited this fiscal situation, Bennet delivered the moment that exposes the entire charade. You inherited from Donald Trump, who was here. This isn't historical amnesia, it's documented fact. Trump's previous tax cuts blew a massive hole in the deficit, and now the same administration wants to double down on the same failed strategy. The $2.4 trillion this plan adds to the national debt isn't theoretical. It pushes the deficit to GDP ratio to 7%, a level Bessent himself previously called unsustainable. We're now paying more in interest on our debt than we spend on national defense. Moody's has downgraded our credit rating. The World Bank has cut our growth projections in half. These aren't political attacks. They're market responses to fiscal irresponsibility. Bessent's defense strategy revealed everything wrong with this approach. Rather than address the mathematical impossibility of his proposals, he fell back on electoral mandates and procedural deflections. When confronted with the reality that interest rates hit 20-year highs and bond markets are demanding fiscal restraint, he blamed timing rather than acknowledging the structural problems his policies would create. This exchange matters because it exposes a fundamental dishonesty in how tax policy is being sold to the American people. When politicians promise tax cuts will pay for themselves through growth, they're asking you to ignore decades of evidence to the contrary. The Congressional Budget Office has repeatedly shown that tax cuts for the wealthy generate minimal economic multiplier effects, meaning they don't create enough additional economic activity to offset their cost. Kansas tried this experiment under Governor Brownback and nearly bankrupted the state before reversing course. When they claim fiscal responsibility while proposing to borrow money to fund tax cuts for people who don't need them, they're banking on mathematical illiteracy. But the consequences are measurable and immediate. Higher deficits drive up borrowing costs for everyone, from small businesses seeking loans to families buying homes. When the federal government competes for capital by issuing more bonds, it crowds out private investment and raises interest rates across the economy. Bennett's frustration was palpable because he was watching someone propose to mortgage the economic future of teachers, firefighters, and police officers' children to fund tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans. This isn't about partisan politics, it's about whether we're honest about what policies actually cost and who actually pays. The emotional weight of his words, "You can't sit here and lie about that," reflected a deeper institutional crisis. When cabinet nominees can't or won't defend basic arithmetic, it signals that governance itself is becoming unmoored from factual reality. Consider what this means in practice. A teacher in Colorado earning $45,000 annually will see her students lose nutrition assistance while a hedge fund manager receives a $300,000 tax cut. The teacher's tax burden effectively increases to service the debt created by the hedge fund manager's windfall. This isn't wealth creation, it's wealth extraction through government policy. The broader implications extend beyond any single hearing. When Treasury secretaries can't defend their basic arithmetic, when they deflect rather than address fundamental mathematical contradictions in their proposals, it signals that economic policy is being driven by ideology rather than evidence. Financial markets notice these things. Credit rating agencies notice. International partners notice. If you care about fiscal responsibility, demand that your representative explain how the math actually works. Ask them to show their calculations. Insist on honesty about who benefits and who pays. Because when the numbers don't add up, it's never the wealthy who suffer the consequences, it's everyone else.